name's Bob Graves. They call me the Unconventional Pastor. And tonight, I'm going to be answering some questions raised by Marshall Brain. Well, good evening, and nice to see you tonight. The questions that I'm talking about are questions that I found raised by the skeptic named Marshall Brain. Now, that appears to be his real name, by the way. Some people are wondering, is that because he's a skeptic and publishes a lot of things about God and his questions about Christianity and things like that. A lot of people wonder if Marshall Brain was really just a pseudonym, and I thought the same thing. In fact, maybe it is, but evidently it's not. Anyway, interesting fellow. And one of the most interesting things about him, I think, is he used to have a website called How Stuff Works, and on it, I suppose he was just sharing his knowledge about how certain things, how this works and how that works. And eventually he sold the website to people who are interested in using it in a very commercial manner, and he made himself a millionaire, which is cool. Can you imagine registering a domain name and using it and then finding somebody else who really wants it and is willing to pay you big bucks for it? That's amazing. That doesn't happen to everybody, but it's kind of like a combination of smarts and luck. I guess he was using his brain. Anyway, he runs a couple of websites still, and one of them is actually whywon'tgodhealamputees.com or something like that. And on that, he's got a number of questions, and he has one page there where he has what he feels are 10 real tough questions. And so tonight I wanted to actually just take a look at some of these questions. Some of these questions I really like. I think they're good questions, and others I'm not so sure they're as good as they might seem on the surface. If you know me at all, you know that there are criticisms that I think that Christianity has truly earned. Criticisms that can be rightly aimed at that tradition. But then sometimes people are critical of the tradition for reasons that really, don't make sense. They're not accurate criticisms. One of the criticisms I was working with just recently, somebody was trying to compare, the fact that Jesus is born on December 25th with other deities and problems like that. And I'm thinking, do you realize that Christianity itself doesn't actually claim that Jesus was born on December 25th. That's just a day the church set aside to do it as a way of trying to displace the very same pagan holidays that you're talking about. And when the church did that, they knew very well that that wasn't the date of Jesus' birth. They just used that date as a way of trying to get the pagan converts to stop celebrating their pagan holidays, which was not an easy thing to get them to do. And so there was a period of time where the Catholic Church, prior to the Protestant Reformation, repurposed a lot of pagan holidays by assigning certain aspects of the church calendar to those days as a way of just kind of Christianizing the culture. And but the Christian faith itself was well established prior to those particular dates being borrowed. So if you want to criticize Christianity for trying to put forth Jesus because of the alleged birth, as if that's something that Christianity has always claimed. And I hear what you're saying, but you've got the history kind of a little bit mixed up. Another thing is, that people talk about other things about Jesus' birth. It's amazing to me when you read the biblical text. And by the way, I'm not one who's going to argue that the biblical text is somehow inerrant, inspired, or the Word of God, or anything like that. But when you read the biblical text, it's amazing how we are so used to hearing stories about Jesus that we don't read the text. We read the text and we hear in it the things we've always heard, even if that's not what the text is saying. The business of the wise men, if you read the text, the wise men were not there when Jesus was born. They, according to the text, see the star in the east, and so they begin following. They don't arrive until 2 to 3 years later, and they visit the child in a house, and they're not there for the birth of Jesus. But so when Christianity has certain stories that it tells for whatever purposes, liturgical, whatever, and people think that might be something that Christianity has really asserted or claims or is part of its doctrine. That's not always true. So there are ways in which I think Christianity can open itself wide to various criticisms, but some criticisms are really just as a little bit of ignorance. And shame to say it, but many times that ignorance is not only something that people who aren't Christians fall for. Many times Christians fall for the same ignorance, and so there's a lot of Christians who believe that it's absolutely biblical to believe that Jesus was born on December 25th, and the Bible doesn't really say that, and the early church didn't even believe that. And in fact, the early church didn't celebrate Jesus' birth at all. It just wasn't part of their. Anyway, so I was looking at Marshall Brain's website. Why won't God heal amputees? And he asked some very good questions among some 10 that he's asking. And of course, the first one he feels is radically important. Why is it that God won't heal amputees? Now, I really can't fault anybody for asking this question, because we would like to be able to reason that, well, if this is something that God could do, why doesn't he just do it? I mean, but then again, one could ask this question not just of amputees, but of a lot of things, and it appears to me that it's rather obvious and of course this is sometimes the very thing that many atheists are trying to point out. It's kind of obvious that God doesn't seem to be in the business of interfering with or modifying human affairs in any manner that we can actually point at and say, see, God is modifying human affairs. It doesn't appear to be that's anything that God is doing. So why doesn't God heal amputees? Why doesn't God do anything? But I do think that although we as human beings empathize with and really are touched by some of the suffering that amputees go through, or that other people suffering various other serious issues, we can empathize. Why doesn't God do a lot of things? But I think we really, if we're going to be honest, we also have to ask the question, why should he? Why should God do any of this stuff? It seems to me that whether there is any God or not, and that question is not an easy question to answer. It's an easy question it's easy to be a skeptic. It's also easy to be a believer. What's hard is being a skeptic who realizes you might be wrong as a skeptic, or a believer who realizes you might be wrong as a believer. That's harder. It's also a little bit more realistic. Evidently, my answer to this would be, it seems to me that whether there is or is not any God, we are definitely in this challenge called life in a way where when it comes to the actual actions that make any difference, we're kind of on our own. And whether that is because God doesn't care or because there's some reason why that's just not where God is going to go, or because, there's no God to even do that, Whatever the reason is, we are here nonetheless facing the challenges that we face and having to come up with these answers somehow and responses to these challenges within the possibilities that are within our grasp and none others. And that's just the way it is. And it seems to me that although we can raise a lot of questions that can be interesting questions, and I don't see any problem with asking interesting questions, but sometimes we're asking questions just because we're trying to throw a monkey wrench into the possibilities. And I'm not so sure we can wrestle with this question as well as it deserves. But it's a good question, and I do like the question. But whatever we do with this question, we cannot lose sight of the fact that without regard to what the answer to this question is, be it, well, there's no God, that's why he doesn't heal amputees, or be it that there's a certain line here that that God isn't going to cross. And to be honest with you, I think it would be extremely foolish for God, if he does exist, to be crossing certain lines. I think that, where do you draw the line? Where do we finally face to the risks of life seriously, and recognize that that many of the fears of the realities of our vulnerability are non-negotiable. The more we start taking extremely seriously the fact that you can't gamble with these, you can't mess around with these, you can't be risking these without being foolish, and if you get caught risking these things, you lose every time. So I do think it's an interesting question, but why is it that God won't heal amputees? It doesn't seem to be on his list of things to do, and it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that we can waste our time wondering about either. We we have actually ourselves, human beings have sometimes helped a great number of amputees. Can't help them all. Maybe someday we can. Maybe someday we'll even learn how to, regrow limbs. I don't know. Who knows what the technology has in the future? But in the meantime, we are where we are. We suffer what we suffer. We have the conditions we have, and when certain things happen, there is no remedy for them. And those are some very sobering and serious facts of life. The answer to which is really, well, that's a good question, but I don't really know the answer to that. Obviously, if there is no God, then the answer to the question is quite obvious. You can't expect God to be doing something when there is no God. But if there were a God, why would God not do that? How would I know, even as good as the question is, how would anybody know? And why are you asking me? Do you have an ability to ask God? And why should God answer you? I think that there is a certain degree to which this question is unapproachable, as much as I don't like that, but sorry, that's the way that it is. Now, why are there so many starving people in our world was Marshall Brain's second question. Now here, this question, I don't like it so much. And the reason is because so many people ask this question because they think that God should do something about this. And I'm one of those people that regardless of whether there is or isn't a God, the notion that somehow this is his fault or God's fault is, in my opinion, extremely irresponsible of human beings to even ask. I'll tell you why there's so many starving people in our world. Because there's too many assholes in our world. That's why. This world is far more capable, even with the population explosion that we have today. There are more people alive on this planet than there have ever been in the history of this planet, as far as we know. And yet, there's still enough food producible by this planet to feed everybody. Why are there starving people on this planet? Well, to be sure, there are some people who are starving because for reasons beyond anything we can do about, they've lost their access to food in some disastrous way. And that does happen. But that is such a small fraction by and large, the vast majority of people who are starving in this world are starving because of political unrest, because of the evil that human beings are doing that forbid the proper moving about of other people so they can take care of their needs, or the proper moving about of goods so that people's needs can be brought to them or so that they can get to market. It is a human problem caused by humans for the most part. And so to ask this question strikes me as being naive and unaware of the role that human beings are playing in causing the great amount of starvation of other human beings. It is because there are too many evil assholes in this world, and there are too many uneducated, unaware people who apparently don't realize that they don't seem to care either. So this is a question that doesn't, in my opinion, question the existence of God. This is a question that, in my opinion, questions the integrity and the empathy and the care and concern of human beings. So why are there so many starving people in our world? Why indeed? This is outrageous, and something should be done about it. And we need to stop the corporate madness that allows us to draw such lines as to make it impossible or difficult. Now, corporate madness isn't the only thing going on. In fact, we've had this kind of starvation going on in this world long before corporations were ever a concept. Just corporations are one of our current methods for being so focused on the need to make a profit that we can't focus on too many other issues. You know, I think that we have some really piss poor priorities in our modern world. And these piss poor priorities not only force us to kind of live a life of imaginary freedom and systematized slavery, we don't have enough time or enough energy to actually pursue some of these other issues, and all the money that we could use to pursue some of these other issues are kind of they're kind of absorbed in military budgets and things like that, you know. So why are there so many starving people in our world? Damn it, I wish I knew, and I wish I could fix that, but the problem is there's too many assholes in the way. That's why. Anyway, question number 3 that he asks is, why does God demand the death of so many innocent people in the Bible? You know, I love this question. It is an excellent question. You know, this question alone ought to make a reasonable, caring, thoughtful human being seriously question if the biblical text is really even a reliable book about God, you know, because I think Richard Dawkins got it right. You know, the God of the Old Testament is malevolent. I mean, look at all the Canaanites. Well, people say, oh, but they were just so evil people. How is it that saying that about Canaanites is any different than the old attitude in America that people used to say about blacks? Oh, they're savages. Or we said about Indians, they're savages. Or we said about blacks, you know, they're dumb, they're stupid, they're this. Now they were slaves. The racism that existed in this country, not that we're completely without it currently, but it used to be far, far worse. You're going to tell me that it's even possible? How can you even believe that they were human beings, and that somehow they didn't possess the sort of DNA that allowed them to have the same kinds of concerns, cares, feelings, needs, and responses to circumstances and situations that you have, including some of the responses that make some of us so jaded that we become sociopathic or violent or whatever, you know. Most people who seem to possess some of these very serious behavioral problems are people who start out as victims. You know, so why does why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? Well, I'll tell you, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. But I'll tell you what, that doesn't make any sense. And I got to be honest with you. Although I am a person who does believe in God, I certainly don't. Can I be honest with you? Of course I'm going to be honest with you. This Yahweh guy, the Old Testament dude, I don't believe in that guy. No, no way. I don't think Jesus did either. But anyway, that's another show. But so why did God demand the death of so many innocent people? I think the culture of the biblical text demanded the death of so many innocent people, and they wrote a text that made it seem like, oh, they're just obeying God. I mean, how convenient that here they are, people who claim to, according to their own history, not have a land, a people without a land, promised a land that is currently occupied by other people. And now God commands them to go in there and wipe them all out. Well, what a deal that is, you know? How is that any different than, I think about the Europeans coming over here to this continent. Before we were ever a nation, more than 240 years ago, when Europeans first came to this nation, there were an estimated 80 million to 120 million Native American Indians alive on this continent. By the time the United States of America had a constitution in effect for the current government that we now have, the population of American Indians is estimated to have been around 6 million. What happened to them? What happened to them? Many of them suffered horrible deaths. And they're gone. Now, let me tell you this. The current descendants of those Indians are not the people who were abused. They're not the people who had the land stolen from them. It was the people who were alive then that had the land stolen from them. And not only that, but although I am a descendant of these Europeans, I didn't steal this land from them, and I didn't steal it from you. And I don't know what the solution is. We're here now. This is the current situation. Many of us have, worked hard to at least, temporarily in the current situation buy the houses we're in. I don't know so I'm not suggesting that the solution is this to somehow try and make it all up. You can't. It's an evil that's done, and it's water over the dam. But we got to be honest about what happened here. Killing all of those people for no reason other than some manifest destiny makes no sense. In fact, this is the same madness that made Hitler think he had every right to get rid of all those Jews. And it's the same madness, in my opinion, that makes the Zionists think they have every right to go back to this Holy Land and somehow destroy all these Palestinians, And there's Palestinians alive today whose property has been taken away from them by a current process. I'm not on the Palestinian side. I'm not on the Israeli side. I condemn the violence on both sides. But I'm telling you something. There's something really bad going on, and particularly with the concept that either of them have the right to be killing each other for doing this. This is madness, and it goes back to the same thing here that you're asking. Why does God demand the death of so many innocent people in the Bible? He doesn't. They just say he did, and what's true is this. The sobering truth is this: human beings seem to be behaving in a way that they demand the deaths of other innocent people. And they're such cowards, they won't take responsibility for it. Instead, they blame it on God, whom they're obeying to do this. Or they blame it on some other noble purpose. I think about the people who the people who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all the justifications I've heard for that, I find are in some ways very unsatisfactory. But no matter how you're talking about it, there's a lot of innocent people who died and a lot of innocent people who suffered as a result of that. Why did we demand that? Was there any other way to resolve these situations than what was done? We better hope that there is, because if there isn't, we're in for a bunch of suffering. We're in for a bunch of human beings continuing to demand the deaths of other human beings who are innocent. And unfortunately, that's the way that one goes. So I think this is an interesting question. I think it really raises the question of the integrity of the text. But I think that also a fine and thorough answer of it is to actually be honest about. If I take Marshall Brain correctly here, I think he's really trying to ask questions that help us to consider the possibility that there really is no such thing as a God involved in these issues at all. But if there is no God, let's just say for the sake of argument that there isn't. Why is there the death of so many innocent people being blamed on a God? And how long are we going to continue doing that? The next question is an interesting question, and I think it has a fairly easy and interesting answer. The next question that Marshall asks is, why is the Bible filled with so much non-scientific nonsense? Well, the answer to that is pretty good. There's actually two answers. Number one, there's some things in the Bible that are read as scientific nonsense that really aren't. They're not actually scientific assertions. And so they're just misread. For example, I remember somebody, Jesus said, "Consider the mustard seed; it is the smallest of all seeds." Well, we found seeds that are smaller than a mustard, so that's not scientifically correct. Something gets lost in translation here, and you're trying to force into these words of the biblical text a little bit of reverse hyperbole. If you think about a mustard seed, it is in the classification of among the smallest seeds that we do have. Compared to the size of some of the seeds that we have, it's among those that one might consider the smallest. And if there are any seeds that are smaller than that, it's not as if they're usually the kinds of seeds that we can deal with that well. Well, poppy seeds, I suppose, but what were they used for back in that day? I don't know if they're used for much of anything. I don't know. But nonetheless, the point of what was being said there can say, the kind of a bush you get out of this small seed, that was the point, and so I don't think that we can actually claim that the person speaking, whether it be Jesus or somebody putting these words in Jesus' mouth, that they're actually trying to make the scientific claim that the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. Oh, come on, let's allow a little bit of literary technique here in the parable that is being used to try to convey something. Chances are the people present at such a teaching thought it was among those small seeds. And evidently, the author, whoever wrote that, well, probably, if this wasn't an actual saying from Jesus, probably thought, hey, this works, So it's not as if somebody was trying to make some sort of a scientific claim. That's one answer. The other answer is this. Why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? Well, the Bible doesn't contain any anti-scientific nonsense. The Bible contains a lot of unscientific nonsense, and there's a difference. You see, if you go back only 10 years. 10 years ago, there were some things that scientifically we didn't know then that we know today. And you go back 10 years earlier from that, and there's some things that we scientifically didn't know then that we knew 10 years ago. And you go back further and further. Well, let's go all the way back to the day in which the biblical text was written. There was a whole bunch of scientific things that we now know that those people had no clue about. So when they wrote about things as they best understood them. They weren't anti-scientific. They just didn't have the kind of scientific knowledge. And of course, since, human beings wrote this text, of course it's going to include the kind of assumptions about the nature of reality that they lived under, including the ridiculous notion of the firmament and the corners of the earth and the pillars and all that, and the firmament and all that stuff. Of course, they had that Babylonian model of cosmology, and some of them had no clue that there was anything to reality that even went beyond the canopy above, let alone this vast area called outer space, the cosmos. They had no concept of this, So the Bible doesn't contain any anti-scientific nonsense. The Bible contains some things that were never intended to be scientific statements that are sometimes criticized for being inaccurate. And the Bible also contains other unscientific nonsense that has to do with the lack of knowledge of that day. So that's why it's there, and we could criticize any book that might make certain analogies or explain certain things as best as one could in that day, and it's going to all be kind of funny. In fact, if we wanted to go back and start reading science books from 500 years ago, you would be surprised how much unscientific nonsense you can actually find in some of the science books when you go back. And indeed, I am sure that if we were to look at the kind of literature that's going around even today, if we could look at it 100 years from now, we'd look back and we go, that wasn't very scientific there. That was kind of ignorant. But that's the way science works. Science is constantly moving forward. Every day of the world, we are experiencing the validation and the determination of certain things to be so that we never knew previously could be validated as so. Some of those things we are suspicious might be so today, and some of those things we haven't even gotten a clue yet what to think. But science isn't done. More things are yet to be discovered, and the way we think about some of those things today is, unscientific, because that's just the nature of the human condition, that the things that we have not yet scientifically discovered, we don't know about them yet. And so when we're talking about them, we're talking nonsense in ways we don't even realize. And so that explains why the Bible in so many places is filled with unscientific nonsense, because they didn't know what they're talking about. They thought they did, but they didn't know what they're talking about. Another question that Marshall asks here is, why is the Bible such a huge proponent of slavery? Well, I think this is an interesting question, but I also think that it is a question that can be thought of as being sociologically naive. Indeed, some people say, well, we don't put up with slavery today. Oh, but we do. We've just changed. We've modified. We've modernized. Think about it. Human beings, even those of us who think of ourselves as free, we can't go out into our own backyards and live self-sufficiently. We can't raise our own livestock and our own vegetables enough so that we can actually cut out for ourselves a living, even though the earth, I think, could allow a great number of us to do that if we wanted to. No. We've structured a society where you have to develop a skill that's going to be of use to other people, and you're going to have to go get a job, or you're going to have to become an entrepreneur and a capitalist and create your own jobs for you and other people. And we've set up a situation where we are not just cooperating, but we are so interdependent that we have gotten to the point that we have no choice in the matter. And so there's a sense in which, so what's the difference between this and slavery, other than the fact that there are different axes upon which we possess freedom and different axes upon which we don't? I mean, in the old slavery days, if you had a good worker and that good worker was ill, oh my goodness, you'd do anything you could to make sure that your property was restored to good health. Well, today, if you've got a good worker and and you're not providing him with health insurance, man, he gets sick and he can't afford health insurance on the wages you're paying him. Well, another worker will come along, and what do you care? There's a sense in which today you can have these cultural slaves, and you don't even have to pay for the health care. That's awesome. How convenient that is. By the way, let me just say this in passing. A lot of people have this notion that people who work should only be paid what we value their work completed at. I say, well, I hear you. I understand that, and I think there's some reasonableness in that. But here's the thing. What if it takes a human being to do that job? Well, there are some jobs that you might not value the work being done. Well, why do you need it done if you don't value it? And why are you going to hire a human being to do it if you're not willing to pay that human being what a human being needs to meet their responsible needs. It's a fake job. You're a fake business. How dare you call yourself an honest businessman? You know, if you're not paying your workers enough so they can actually afford to meet their own needs, you're stealing their labor. Well, you know, the going market rate, I don't give a damn about the going market rate. You're hiring a human being, you need to pay that human being what a human being is worth. Well, we couldn't afford to do it. Well, then you can't do it. Stop it. Find another business to be in. Oh, we're trying to get too many things done that we think we can get done just because we can put people over a barrel, you know. So the question is, you know, why do we put up with so much slavery? But I suppose the part of the other answer is, why does the Bible have so much slavery? When you go back into those ancient days, many things about man's sociological and civil arrangements were very primitive. And I think there was some situations in which being a slave might have actually been better than simply being totally abandoned. I don't really know that with full certainty, and I'm sure it's not true in every case. But as horrible as slavery was, it seems that we have come out of a very dark time of human history, and slavery was unfortunately a part of that. And I suppose the reason why there's so much slavery in the Bible is because that culture was so steeped in it. They were blind to the absurdities of it and to the unkindness of it, or to the solutions for it, or the ways out of it. And so, being so stuck in such a condition, they probably had to try to find a way of making it sound like it was okay. But it isn't. And I think that that's an interesting question. But sociologically, just as you might not like the solutions and the criticisms I had of our present day circumstance and situation, which perhaps 1,000 years from now people look back and they'll look at the horrible things that Americans stood for when it came to capitalism, and the horrible way they abused people, and how things like where the people who own Walmart are some of the wealthiest people in the world, and yet so many of their employees full-time working well are some of the most taxing recipients of our benefits from our government for medical needs and food stamps and things like that, because these people have designed a business where they're not paying these workers that they have what these workers really require in order to meet their adult responsibilities. How dare you offer somebody and call it a job when you're not going to pay them what they need to meet their responsibilities? Well, the job that they're going to do isn't worth it that much to me. Okay, well then you don't have a job for them. You don't have a job. Well, without that job, you don't have a business. Well, then you don't have a business. When are you going to be honest about it and deal with it straightforward, instead of saying, well, I'm going to look at a market and come up with all those other rules that we've come up with that seem how to allow you to just bypass the fact that you're stealing labor? Well, I don't know. So I'm not so sure that the slavery question is one as horrific as it is one that we've yet settled. I'm not so sure about it. Anyway, why do bad things happen to good people is question number 6. That's an interesting question, but I really think there's something wrong with the question. Bad things happen. Good things happen. And of the bad things that happen and the good things that happen, first of all, it's we as human beings that are evaluating them as good and bad. And I'm not saying that we're wrong on that either. But, good things happen and bad things happen. And when they happen, they happen. And I'm not so sure that when bad things happen to good people, that it's proper to even think of it as, oh, this is a bad thing and it's happening to a good person. Well, that's neither here nor there. It's a bad thing and it's happening to someone. I think that's more to the point. And there are good things that happen to people. Some people we might think of as undeserving. But I think we also need to be honest when we're living in a world so full of risks. We need to ask ourselves, why shouldn't bad things that happen to whoever happens to be there when the bad thing happens? Why shouldn't it be that way? I think we need to be equally open to asking that question. Otherwise, we're just trying to find fault with something you don't have a solution for. And you don't. You know, bad things happen. It's the nature of life. And I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying there's nothing we should do about it. But, you know, bad things do happen. They do happen. And when they happen to the people who happen to be in harm's way at the moment that the bad things happen. And it's tragic. I think that there's a lot that we could do about a lot of these bad things to keep them from happening to anybody, let alone to good people. And I'll tell you what, I think that a lot of these things won't stop happening to good people until we realize we should stop them from happening to anybody, let alone just good people, you know. So maybe our attitude is a little bit off, and maybe something about our attitude is even revealed in this question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen at all? That's a good question. Have we really answered it? Do we really care? Are we willing to take responsibility for the bad things that do happen and the role we may have played in the fact that they come about that way? I think that's a far better question as far as I'm aware. Question number 7. Why do none of the miracles that Jesus did in the Bible, why is it that there's no evidence of them remaining today? Why didn't he leave behind any evidence? That's the question that Marshall asked. Well, you know, first of all, I don't know that I'm of the suspicion that some of the miracles that may have been attributed to Jesus were just kind of embellishments. It didn't really kind of happen that way. I'm suspicious that may have been true, but I'm not so sure that we have to conclude that's true of all of them or necessarily. I mean, it's certainly if the whole thing is just a total misunderstanding. I don't think it was just a complete myth, but even if it was just an exaggeration, an embellishment, and a legendizing of a person, you know, the truth is the very fact that there is even this movement called Christianity today is in some ways, I would have to say, some evidence that's been left behind. So I'm not so sure that we can ask the question. It's more like it's a question that presumes a bit much, perhaps. Not only that, but when you ask the question, why is it that none of the miracles that Jesus may have been doing in the Bible didn't leave behind any evidence? There's not a whole lot of evidence that any of the things that actually did happen 2,000 years ago actually happened 2,000 years ago. In fact, the only reason why we can be pretty certain that things did happen 2,000 years ago is because we're pretty sure that 2,000 years ago there was a time that actually existed and that there were people around and they did things, you know. But what evidence do we have for 99.9999999% of the things that they did? Very little, you know. So why should miracles in particular be the kind of thing we're looking for evidence? Now, I'm not defending the idea that all these miracles occurred. I'm just saying the question is a bit presumptuous, don't you think? What do you mean, evidence? Why should there be evidence for anything that Jesus did, miracle or not, at this late date? You know, why? You know, particularly at the time when he was really not that major of a figure at the time that he was alive, and he wasn't even in Jerusalem until the bitter end. So for most of the time that Jesus is wandering around, 99.999% of the world didn't even know who the hell he was or that it was even happening, you know. So why should there be any evidence? None of that, but if there had been any evidence, something that a lot of people forget about is this. Do you know that Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D.? Who knows what sort of documents, evidence, testimonies, words, inscriptions, or whatever were destroyed in that? We have no idea. There may have actually been significant evidence concerning some of the things that Jesus did that were destroyed. We don't know. We can't say that it didn't exist. We can't claim that it did. But we certainly know this. Whatever evidence may have existed in what was destroyed, that did happen, whether it was a miracle or something else, is destroyed and is gone, and that evidence didn't survive because people went in there and destroyed the city. That's why. So there's a reason for it, for some of that evidence as to why it doesn't exist, and there's no reason to expect that any of the evidence for a great number of things that happened in the ancient day should have persisted in some evidentiary manner to this day. So I don't think the question is really as good a question as it may seem on its face. How do we explain the fact that Jesus has never appeared to us? I'll tell you, I don't know, but Look at all the mischief that has gone through the human race already for people who have claimed that Jesus appeared to him. I can't think of anything more stupid or foolish than a real God could ever do than to actually appear to people, given the kind of things that we do with such claims. So I would really expect that if there is a God, if there really is a God, that it would probably be extremely wise for that God to be so discreet in any manner he might reveal his hand, that it would leave the people to whom he has revealed his arm and hand no absolute proof of being able to show that to anybody, because people just do stupid things with such things like that. And not only that, but it becomes the wow factor instead of, I was reading a picture the other day that was said, people are so caught up in the theology and the claims and the attributes of Jesus, they've completely forgotten the message of being transformed, of being changed, of finding freedom in the fact that maybe God loves them. The message of Christianity is totally lost in the dogma of the doctrine of Christianity. I think it was Richard Rohr who was saying something. I can't remember what his exact words were, but I thought it was pretty cool. Anyhow, we're almost there. Why would Jesus want you to eat his body and his flesh? That seems kind of, I think something's lost in translation here. Jesus even at times said things like, "I am the bread of life." There was a real metaphor going on here, And so when he's saying, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood," I think that he was trying to, really push the buttons of the but really trying to get you to think about, what does he mean when he says, "I am the door," or "I am the bread of life," or this and that? What is he saying? What does that really mean? And I think that can leave us in a situation where we're asking serious questions. But I don't think that Jesus was in any manner using cannibalism as some sort of a literal device. I think that there's something here where it gets lost in translation, the impact of this modest proposal, as it were. Anyway, so the last question, and I'm really a little bit over time here. Why do Christians get divorced at the same rate as non-Christians? Well, the answer here is this: because Christians are so busy thinking that they're right and thinking that God is going to help them with their marriages that they don't lift a finger to make their marriages better too often. And as a result, their marriages fall apart at the same rate as other people because, well, the real answer is this: the reason why Christian marriages fall apart at the same rate is because these people don't know enough to get divorced. And if they did, their rate of divorce would be even higher than other people. So that's best answer I can come up with. Anyhow, these are my thoughts on Marshall Brain's, some of them really good questions that I found on his website. Why doesn't God heal amputees? So thanks for listening. My name is Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor. I've enjoyed the chat tonight, and we'll catch you again. Coming up in about 10 minutes, we're going to be here on The Place. Sometimes we call it the Cult of Honesty on a Wednesday night, and I have no idea what's on the agenda for tonight, but we're going to see you in 10 minutes, and we're going to talk about something. Daryl will be there. Who knows who else will be there? Dr. Jones will be there, and I understand Rhonda's back in town. She might even be there. Let's see what happens. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you later. Take care. And I muted your microphone because I could hear you guys a little bit. So your microphone is off if you need to talk back to me.